welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into some really fascinating source material. It's a research paper called Health, Risk, and Pleasure: The Formation of Gendered Discourses on Women's Alcohol Consumption.
By Elinor, Månsson and Alexandra Bogren.
Exactly. And our mission here is to sort of unpack how these public stories, these narratives about women and alcohol get built.
Yeah.
It reveals some, well, surprising contradictions and assumptions that really shape how you might think about healthy choices.
Yeah, and the core idea, the kind of paradox the research points to, is how women's drinking is often shown in two very different ways at once.
Right, like it's a serious health risk and it's also a sign of pleasure, maybe even empowerment.
Precisely. And the paper argues these aren't really opposites. They're actually, two sides of the same coin, both subtly reinforcing certain ideas about gender.
Okay, so let's try and unpack that a bit. These gender discourse, it's like they're invisible filters, right?
Yeah.
Shaping what you see and how you're kind of expected to interpret it.
That's a good way to put it. And the researchers show that whether the media message is negative, focusing on risk, or positive, focusing on pleasure, it nearly always draws on specific ideas about gender equality and supposed biological differences between men and women.
So let's start with the risk part. That's often in newspapers, right?
Yes, exactly. The risk narrative, it consistently frames women's drinking as a problem, portraying women as this vulnerable group.
Even though, as the paper notes, men actually tend to drink more and have more negative consequences.
Right. That's a key point. But this risk gets framed in specific ways for women. There's biological risk, linking alcohol to fertility, pregnancy, hormones, sort of framing women as being closer to nature or inherently more fragile in that sense.
Okay. What else?
Then there's physical appearance risk, warnings about wrinkles or getting a worn look because, appearance is often emphasized. We also see sexual risk concerns about, say, vulnerability to STDs or becoming a victim. And finally, social risk, which is about how drinking might affect how a woman is judged morally or her ability to, quote, fulfill her duties.
The paper makes this really interesting point here. It suggests that when women do drink heavily, this risk narrative often frames it as them drinking like men.
And the implication is that this is somehow a misunderstanding of gender equality.
As if women can't be like men biologically. So trying to act too equal in this way is inherently risky or wrong. Like a subtle warning.
Exactly. It subtly reinforces these perceived biological limits, which, as you said, sits really awkwardly next to other media messages about female empowerment.
So how does that side work? The pleasure narrative.
Ah, yes. That's often found more in, say, women's magazines. These portrayals are positive. Drinking is shown as part of a successful, happy, maybe even empowered lifestyle.
And how is that pleasure shown?
Well, a few ways. There's self-pleasuring drinking presented as a reward, an escape, maybe relaxing with a glass of wine after a hard day, self-care almost.
Okay.
Then there's the girlfriend's intimacy angle, women drinking together in exclusively female groups, which reinforces a certain kind of girly femininity.
Right, the shared bottle of rosé kind of image.
Exactly. And of course, there's partying and socializing, glamorizing, getting tipsy or drunk as just, fun and trendy, being part of the scene.
So, okay, if the risk narrative warns against being too equal, what's the underlying message here? It sounds positive, but the researchers say it also reinforces gender norms. How?
Well, paradoxically, these positive images don't really challenge traditional femininity. Instead, they take a behavior often associated with masculinity drinking and make it seem, quote, reassuringly feminine.
Ah, so it's framed within that whole post-feminist idea, like we've achieved equality, so now empowerment is just about individual choices and consumption.
Precisely. It suggests feminism's work is done, and now women can just choose empowerment by buying or consuming the right things, like certain alcoholic drinks in certain settings. It kind of neatly sidesteps any deeper structural issues.
So the media creates this really complex, maybe even contradictory landscape for women.
Definitely. The same drinking behavior could be seen as shameful risk-taking in one context, like a newspaper article, but totally affirmed as fun or sophisticated in another, like a magazine ad.
Which puts the individual woman, puts you in a tricky spot. You're navigating these conflicting messages, and choice becomes less about actual health risks and more about, what, fitting in.
Yeah, or achieving what the researchers call intelligibility. Basically making sense within one of these prepackaged gendered roles. Am I the responsible one worried about risk? or the fun-loving one embracing pleasure.
So what did the researchers suggest we do? They call for more critical thinking, right?
They do. They urge everyone, especially other researchers, to be careful not to accidentally reinforce these very media narratives they're studying.
How? What are the key things they suggest?
Okay, first, actively question why women's drinking gets problematized so much more than men's, especially when men have higher rates of adverse outcomes.
Right. Don't just accept the premise.
Second, try to avoid overemphasizing biology when discussing women's drinking, because that can easily slip into reinforcing those old, limiting binary stereotypes about inherent differences.
Makes sense. And the third?
Be really cautious about emphasizing individual agency and choice, particularly in contexts like commercial media, because that language, the language of choice and empowerment, is often co-opted to sell products, and it can hide the underlying power structures and influences at play.
Wow. This deep dive really highlights how deeply embedded these gender expectations are. It's not just about the health facts. It's layered with societal values.
Absolutely. And maybe the key thing for you listening is to start noticing this. Notice how even messages that seem contradictory, risk versus pleasure, might actually be working together to reinforce certain expectations, particularly around gender.
Yeah. It leaves you with a big question, doesn't it?
It does. When the information you get is so tangled up in these conflicting cultural narratives, how do you actually make a genuinely informed or rational choice? What does being well-informed even mean in that kind of landscape?
Definitely something to think about.